Okay,
Hurrah!
fine.
Take
Uh,
it away.
Good evening. Well, from this hotbed of communist thought, I have some ideas for you. The first thing I'd like to say is that something happened yesterday which teaches us about the straight line struggle between the difference between a capitalist country, an imperialist country, and a socialist country, however much it's struggling. Yesterday, the government of Vietnam delivered 450,000 units of protective clothing to the United States. Now, you might want to remember that the United States dropped 2.5 million tons of ammunition on Vietnam. 260 million cluster bombs were dropped on Vietnam. And yet, the Vietnamese people, in living memory of that horrendous war, have sent the United States protective clothing. This tells you the difference between an imperialist society and a socialist society. I'm going to share with you the example of Kerala, a state in southwestern India. It's a state with 35 million people. It's a part of India with a GDP of about $140 billion. It's quite a big state. It's an important, if it was a country in Europe, you'd consider it one of the bigger countries, but it's merely a state in very large India. I want to first say to you that the state has a vibrant communist movement. Currently, the government is a communist government. But what this has meant is that for the last 7 decades, public action has been greatly supported by the state. In other words, there are robust trade unions, there are robust women's organizations. And I just want to introduce you to one organization, a cooperative. Kerala is filled with cooperatives of all kinds. I said that the population is 35 million. I should say that the largest of the cooperatives is named Kudumbushri. It's an all-women's cooperative, and it has a membership of 3.5 million people. 3.5 million women are organized into Kudumbushri, a cooperative. They produce cooperatively. In other words, Kerala's socialism isn't just about distribution, fixing the distribution of services and goods. It's about production. The production of goods through cooperatives, decommodification of as much of the economy as possible. Because of this history of having a communist state and having public action be so fundamentally supported, Kerala's response to COVID-19 has been quite special. And I just want to list a few things for you. The most important thing was the health minister, K.K. Shalja, teacher. You see, she in January was well aware when she saw that something was happening in Wuhan. She is a science-based health minister, unlike health ministers in most of the Western world who seem to have some sort of hallucination about science. She is very science-based. She saw the reports from Wuhan and she said, we have students from Kerala in Wuhan. They immediately created a task force on the 5th of January. Now, you got to remember, the WHO was informed by the government of China on the 31st of December. Government of China informed the US Center for Disease Control on the 31st of December. On the 5th of January, Kerala had already created a task force. United States created a task force in March, friends. That's the advanced industrial state in the world. The imperialist leader was sitting on their hands. Boris Johnson thought this was a joke. Shailja, teacher, whose name you've never heard, set up a working group already in the 5th of January. So they already began to mobilize state resources and prepare. And they contacted all the mass organizations, trade unions, cooperatives, women's organizations, said, get going. We need you. So the trade unions in bus stands set up washing places to wash hands when you got off the bus and so on. Massive public action, not driven by the state. The communism of Kerala is not all state initiative. It's also public action. It's very important. Everything in a communist society, just as in China, need not be done by the state. In China, in fact, neighborhood committees kicked in across Wuhan. I've just written a 3-part series on how China broke the chain of infection. Neighborhood committees played an enormous role. Even in China, you have a vision of China as being a top-down authoritarian society. You're just drinking the garbage from the Daily Mail and the Guardian, the most execrable newspaper, pretends to be liberal doesn't know how to cover the rest of the world. They have a vision of China totally top down. They don't know anything about neighborhood committees, cooperatives, how people volunteer, immense tradition of volunteerism in these socialist societies. Well, the chief minister, the health minister began to do daily press briefings, science-based press briefings. They taught people not about flattening the curve, which I can go on about that at length. They said the slogan is break the chain. They didn't say social distancing. This is a socialist society. They said physical distancing, social solidarity. It's a much better slogan than social distancing. Physical distancing, for sure. Wear masks, don't spit in each other's faces, as we saw in the United States, where Asian people were being discriminated against because the United States decided this in a racist way to say China is responsible. No, physical distance, but social solidarity. We need to take care of each other. This was the slogan from the government. One, break the chain of infection. Second, physical distance, not social distance, but social solidarity imperative. This public action by the state was by organizations and society very important. I gave you the one example of trade unions coming out there and building sinks to wash hands at bus stations and so on. That was happening over there. Kudumbushri, this very large cooperative, started making masks. Another trade union, which is a construction workers union, started to build temporary relief centers. And then the chief minister said something very important. You see, in a capitalist society, the best that the capitalist sclerotic brain can think of is small cash disbursements to each individual who is facing difficulty, some kind of universal basic income scheme, or just a check written to people. Let's send everybody in the UK so many pounds. This is how a capitalist relief works. Give people money. No, not in Kerala. Kerala, yes, we'll underwrite pensions, we'll help you with this, that's fine. In fact, $260 million worth of Indian rupees was set aside to provide income support to people. But that's not the point, really. That's not relief. The real relief was immediately 43 community kitchens were set up across the state. In every district, community kitchens were set up. Why is this important? You see, when you give an individual or a household cash, they go to the market and they start to bid up the prices of food. This creates food inflation. It's a big error for a socialist to believe everything should be commodified. You must try to decommodify as many parts of social life as possible. And in Indian communism, this is a fundamental aspect of our work. We don't want everything to be commodified. People they're suffering, give them money. No, people are suffering. How do we enhance people's social existence without the existence of money? So let's produce food kitchens for people to come, and also we can deliver food to people. Apps were created for food delivery from cooperatives, and also food delivery which is uncooked. So the government decided they'll create a ration system. So much rice, so much vegetables. So you can get rations delivered to your homes. Who will deliver these rations? Not necessarily government employees, but mass organizations of the trade unions, student movement, youth movement, etc. You see, when you live in a capitalist society which has been under austerity and privatization for decades, the institutions of society have been destroyed. Trade unions have been really put under immense pressure to defend the rights of workers. They're unable to be altogether creative with building society. They are defending against an enormous attack for decades and decades and decades. When you look at places like Kerala, where the trade unions have not faced this kind of attack, they've been able to defend the rights of workers, but also enter into society to take a cultural position vis-a-vis how people organize their lives. This is very important. We don't want to live lives as atomized individuals. Nobody wants to be an individual. Robinson Crusoe sitting on an island. By the way, he was not much of an individual. He had somebody who was working for him there. But leave that aside. That's an old imperialist novel for you. We remember it as Crusoe. What's his name? Friday. So, in Kerala, the point isn't to create an individualized, atomized, it's to create a society, and for that you need public action. It's a fundamental thing. The very last thing I want to talk about is that because of these really very interesting and impressive moves made by the government of Kerala, similar to what happened in China, extraordinary action by the government in China, extraordinary. I mean, you won't know it if you read the Western press, because Western press is doing a classic psychological process of transference. You don't want to blame Boris Johnson, you blame the Chinese government. You don't want to blame Donald Trump, blame the Chinese. It's transference. You have failed, but you're blaming them for your failure. It's extraordinary. I mean, people around the world are laughing at these press accounts that are coming about this, because after all, the Chinese are bringing plane loads of goods to Iran, to India, all over the world, delivering goods as much as possible to help sort out this crisis. But this last point I want to make is they were able to break the chain. People have died. This is a terribly lethal and dangerous virus, very dangerous. Let's not minimize it. People have died. Health workers have died. It's not going to be easy. There is a worry of a second wave of infections. It's not that because it's come near zero, it's over. Health workers are certainly up there in our imagination now, but I'll guarantee you one thing, friends. In 6 months' time, when this virus is gone and a health worker tries to unionize in most parts of the world, they will be smashed. If you're not there defending the health workers, the teachers and others, you've lost your moral compass. This is not, these are not essential services only in a time of crisis. We have to teach these wretched cultures, this wretched capitalist culture, that it's not enough to call somebody essential when you need them and to throw them away when you don't need them. That's the moral failure of capitalism. Make sure they remember that. Thanks.
Vijay, that was absolutely class. Thanks for that. You mentioned there was a 3-part series. Was that was on China and its response? Is that in Tricontinental?
No, that's I can put it in the chat for you.
Yes,
if you'd like. It's at a website called peoplesdispatch.org. And I've written it with 2 of my colleagues, one from Shanghai, one from Beijing. One is a lawyer, one is a linguist. We have been looking at this very carefully, and it's a totally factual set of articles. It's not the hallucinations of most of the press. So I can put that in the chat if you'd like.
That would be awesome. Thanks so much. We've got time for a really brief question as well. So as quickly as it's possible to answer a question like this, what are the main things that socialists in the UK and other Western capitalist countries need to consider when thinking about developing new forms of food production and distribution to ensure that it's not built on the exploitation of countries in the global South?
Well, firstly, I'm very happy to hear what Louise was talking about, this national food service. But, that's a distribution system. That's not a production system. I would say that you in the World Transformed need to articulate a 30-year project, a serious socialist project for your society. You can't create socialism immediately in a crisis. You need a long project. You need to create public action. When I visited the World Transformed the previous year, I was so happy to see people with so much enthusiasm. That enthusiasm has to be institutionalized. You cannot allow enthusiasm to be privatized again. You come back home, you look at photos from the event, you feel nostalgia, you look forward to next year. That's a privatization of enthusiasm. You need to institutionalize it. In every locality, that is enthusiasm must become public action. If every locality in the UK doesn't create the platforms for public action, in 30 years, you'll be having the same discussion now. The 1968 generation failed to institutionalize the enthusiasm. They allowed the enthusiasm, the experience to become nostalgia. Don't allow that to happen to you. You are the generation of the 2015 student movement. Don't allow that movement to become a feature of nostalgia. It has to be institutionalized to create a public culture in Britain that's a socialist culture, and in 30 years will have completely transformed the entire country.